Which bigger ex-wide receiver prospect has the best chance to replace A.J. Brown if the Eagles address that position in the 2026 NFL Draft?
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day, and thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase. Welcome in to this Wednesday edition of the show. Today on the podcast, we're going to do the AJ Alshon J-Jaw scale for the big-bodied wide receiver prospects in the 2026 NFL Draft. Which one of these bigger bodies could replace A.J. Brown as a true alpha #1 receiver? Which of these prospects are more of a contested catch, role-playing wide receiver 2? Maybe like an Alshon Jeffrey, who seems like they have bust written all over them, kind of like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. We're going to get into that, plus some overlooked prospects at positions of need for the Eagles, and we got to talk about it. The Mike Vrabel, Dianna Russini drama added a brand new wrinkle to the A.J. Brown trade saga. All that and more coming your way on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. But let's start with the A.J. Alshon J-Jaw scale. I want to talk about some of these wide receiver prospects that if the Eagles want to, if they trade A.J. Brown, and that's still a big if, but I think it's going to happen. If the Eagles trade A.J. Brown and they want to add a similar style of wide receiver to complement what they have in DeVonta Smith and in Hollywood Brown, if they're looking for a guy that's, 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", a big-bodied wide receiver that can play against press coverage on the outside, and a true X that can be a contested catch player, big hands in traffic, a red zone kind of weapon. If they want to target that kind of receiver, which I don't know if they're hell-bent on that, but if they want to, who are the players that can replace A.J. Brown? Who are more of the role players that could be, Alshon Jeffrey at one point in his career, especially with the Chicago Bears, was a high-end wide receiver 1, but with the Philadelphia Eagles, I feel like he was a lower-end wide receiver 1, probably in a best-case scenario world. He's a really elite #2 contested catch, big-bodied wide receiver. And then, of course, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside was just a complete bust, a bigger player that could not separate at the NFL level, really did not have strong enough hands to win in contested catch situations, and he was just an absolute bust of a second-round pick. So I did the AJ, JJ, Jeffrey scale here with these prospects in 2026 that fit this style of player. And let's start with Washington wide receiver Denzel Boston. And this might be an unpopular take, but I think Denzel Boston is J-Jaw written all over him. I really do. I went back and watched a lot of his tape this morning before doing the podcast, and I think some of it's about value because a lot of these bigger wide receivers struggle to separate. A lot of these wide receivers, they win in just a couple specific ways, and I think Denzel Boston kind of fits that criteria. But the difference between Denzel Boston and, let's say, somebody I'm going to talk about later on in the show, Jacoby Lane from USC, or Notre Dame's Malachi Fields, is that Denzel Boston is likely going to be a first-round pick. Or if not a day 1 pick, it's going to be an early day 2 selection. If the Eagles want Denzel Boston, it might have to be at 23 overall, or they might have to trade up from pick 54. And for me, I don't think he is worth that kind of value. Could he be Mike Evans? Could he be the new Drake London or Ted McMillan? Sure. But I don't know. I see this stiffer athlete off the line of scrimmage that sometimes struggles to win against press coverage. He just seems like a stiff athlete. He moves a lot like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside moved. And it's not just because he played at the Pac-12, but kind of has these alligator arms. I don't know. I don't see it with him. I don't think he tested very well at the NFL scouting combine. I just don't see a guy that can win in many ways. Now, maybe he's a solid role player at the NFL level, but again, when we're talking about value, he's going to go on day 1 or early day 2. And I just don't think, like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who is a former second-round pick, that Denzel Boston has a complete enough skill set to be worth that kind of value. I don't know. I don't see it with Denzel Boston. I don't think he is the A.J. Brown replacement. Just looking at his kind of movement style, I don't know. I see JJ. Maybe that's an unpopular take. I don't see a lot of people that agree with me out there, but I have a little bit of concern with Denzel Boston. When it comes to Louisville's Chris Bell, though, I think Chris Bell could be an AJ Brown. I think when you compare him to Denzel Boston or some other guys I already mentioned, like Malachi Fields, Jacoby Lane, even who I'm about to talk about in a minute, like Ted Hurst or Chris Brazzell from Georgia State and Tennessee, I think of all these bigger body wide receiver prospects, Chris Bell, I think, has the best chance to be a do-it-all, physically dominating, true alpha wide receiver one. And look, the Eagles do have DeVonta Smith. It's not like they need that wide receiver one, but I think if you're going to take a guy in the first 2 rounds, you'd like them to have that kind of upside. And I don't think Denzel Boston has that. I think Chris Bell does. I think he moves so much better than a lot of these other bigger guys. I think he is the best run after the catch receiver in this class of players that are his size or taller. And I know he had a torn ACL last year, but it does sound like he could be ready for training camp, probably is going to be ready for the regular season. With the Eagles, I think they could also afford to be a little bit patient with an injured player because they do have DeVonta Smith. They do have Hollywood Brown. They did get Dallas Goedert back as well on a 1-year contract extension. Chris Bell, to me, like if you're looking for long-term wide receiver one upside, the most complete skill set, I think Chris Bell is the guy to me over Denzel Boston. And then a lot of these guys are more like, I think, an Alshon Jeffrey. I think they could be, in certain situations, the best receiver on your football team. But in an ideal world, he's probably your second best passing target. And with Alshon Jeffrey, like he was your best wide receiver in a Super Bowl season in 2017. He was a great playoff performer as well. Super clutch. You know, I know he dropped the pass against New Orleans in 2018, but you look at that stretch run of the 2018 season, Alshon and Nick Foles, they were so good together. They were instrumental in getting that team back to the playoffs, instrumental in getting that team back to the divisional round. But at the same time, Alshon, he was the number 1 receiver, but he was the number 2 passing target in that offense. The go-to guy in that passing attack was Zach Ertz. So if you're looking for that wide receiver 2 to complement DeVonta Smith, who's that guy that might have a little bit of a lower ceiling than AJ Brown, but he fits that style of player and he can be a really high-end elite, like maybe your version of T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals. I think T. Higgins could be seen as like the modern day version of what prime elite Alshon Jeffrey was with the Chicago Bears and with the first couple seasons with the Philadelphia Eagles. Who are those guys in this draft class? I think that could be Ted Hurst from Georgia State. I think Ted Hurst is a little bit lower on my board compared to somebody like Chris Bell, but I don't know. Like, I think he is a very dynamic athlete as well. And if he didn't go to Georgia State, he would probably be seen as somebody that could be a fringe first-round pick, if not like early second-rounder, whereas right now, according to Tony Pauline, the Eagles view him as a second-round pick, but most teams across the league see him more as a third-rounder. I think Ted Hurst has really good body control. I think he picks up legit speed downfield, unlike some of these other prospects here that we're talking about. And I think he's a better separator. I think he has a better chance to be a better route runner at the next level than somebody like Denzel Boston or some of these other busts that have been coming into the NFL at this size, like Keon Coleman from the Buffalo Bills coming out of Florida State a couple years ago. I think Ted Hurst fits that mold of he's likely a really high-end wide receiver too, but I could see him being like your new Alshon Jeffrey or, you know, what T. Higgins has been with the Cincinnati Bengals, who was also a second-round pick. I think Ted Hurst could be that guy. And I think Chris Brazzell as well from Tennessee is another Alshon Jeffrey kind of player, not stylistically, but again, when it comes to the kind of role that he could have in Philadelphia. I think Chris Brazzell, like Alshon, wasn't this dominating, I can win in any kind of way player. Like that is AJ Brown. That's what I think Chris Bell could become. I think Ted Hurst, there is that kind of ceiling, but I would project he's more of the Alshon high-end wide receiver 2 type. Chris Brazzell, I think he's in that tier as well because like a lot of these players, he is really, really good at winning in just a couple of ways, but the ways he wins, I think translates, unlike Denzel Boston, I think translates better at the NFL level. Like he is somebody that can separate deep down the field on vertical routes. When he gets going over the middle, picking up speed on these seam routes, on these crossers, he reminds me a lot of like a poor man's version of George Pickens or I don't even say poor man's version yet because he could be just as good, if not better. Chris Brazzell, like George Pickens, is probably going to be a second round, high-end second round pick. Chris Brazzell is also kind of like DK Metcalf, who was also a second round pick. He definitely does not have a refined route tree yet, but I see better separating ability with Brazzell. For somebody that's 6'4", 6'5", he is a much more fluid, smooth athlete. And I think when he picks up legit speed down the field, he is an elite field stretcher. At least he was at the college football level. And I think he could be a really high-end wide receiver too. And if he does refine that route tree, I think he has the skill set to be somebody that maybe a team talks themselves into at the back end of the first round if it's a wide receiver needy team and a run on receivers does happen. So that's the way I see it. Let me know what you think. If the Eagles go with a bigger bodied wide receiver in the NFL draft, who would you want? Hit us up on X at LockdownBirds or at DiBiase LOE. Coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, I want to talk about some draft prospects that we haven't really talked about a lot, but they are at positions of need for the Philadelphia Eagles. But first, today's show is sponsored by Betterhelp. Financial stress is something a lot of people are carrying right now, and it's not just about numbers. It can affect your sleep, your relationships, and your overall mental health in ways that build up over time. And the reality is, struggling with money doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it just means you haven't had the right kind of support. It's something that I've thought about for sure, how easy it is to put pressure on yourself financially without really talking about it. The stress that comes with trying to figure everything out on your own, the expectations you feel to have everything together. Therapy isn't about financial advice. It's about working through the stress, the anxiety, and the emotions that come with it. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served, BetterHelp makes it easier to get matched with a licensed therapist, I should say, and start focusing on what you need. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Sign up and get 10% off at BetterHelp.com/lockdown. That's BetterHelp.com/lockdown. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. And thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. Guys, don't forget to check out the Everydayer Club for ad-free episodes and access to a group chat with myself and other Locked On Eagles listeners. You can tap the link in the show notes or head over to LockedOnPodcast.com/everydayer or LockedOnEagles.supercast.com. So we have been deep in our draft coverage over the last couple months, and we are really highlighting certain positions of need for the Philadelphia Eagles, both short-term and long-term. Talking about, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, specifically tackle, but also maybe some inside-out versatility for a player that can play guard, edge rusher, safety. Talking a lot about those positions, talking about a lot of prospects. But I will say there's been some guys that have kind of flown under the radar, not just with me, but I would say with local media, nationally, with fans alike as well, that these guys might not be the favorites to fill certain areas of need for the Eagles, but I do think they could be good fits depending on value, depending on where the board falls. And I kind of want to highlight some of these players at positions of need just in case, because you never know who the Eagles like. They're bored. Everybody's bored in the NFL. Everybody's bored, when it comes to draft analysts and fans. Like, everybody has different preferences for what they're looking for. Just look at, my first segment about what kind of big body receiver that I like compared to others. I could totally see people liking Denzel Boston a whole lot more than Chris Bell, a whole lot more than maybe Chris Brazzell or Ted Hurst. It's all about preference. So I want to highlight some other prospects that maybe the Eagles like more than we think. At wide receiver, to kind of stick with the theme of what we're talking about today with big-bodied wide receivers, how about USC's 6'4" wide receiver, Jacoby Lane? Jacoby Lane's interesting. I think kind of like Denzel Boston, the reason he's going to be probably closer to a third-round pick than a first or second rounder is that I do think he struggles at times to win through contact at the line of scrimmage. I think his lateral agility and explosiveness isn't as great as some other receivers in this class. Some other receivers with this kind of size, like Chris Bell, like Ted Hurst, like Chris Brazzell. But if you're looking for a contested catch guy that can win in the red zone, that has really long arms, that you hope at the NFL level can develop some better separating ability, that I do think after the catch actually is more explosive than he gets credit for, but you don't want to spend the first or second round value that it's going to require to get Denzel Boston in your building, I think that could be Jacoby Lane. I do not think Jacoby Lane is a first or second round pick. I think he is closer to be a third rounder. So maybe if the Eagles want to really focus on going with the trenches early, they want to go offensive line, then defensive line, like tackle, and then edge, or maybe they like a safety. Maybe Emmanuel McNeil-Warren falls in the second round. They want to trade up for that guy, and they took an offensive lineman or an edge rusher on day one. I can see the Eagles with that 68th overall pick being interested in Jacoby Lane. And I know Mekhi Lemon was the better USC receiver by a lot in 2025. But if you look at the 2024 tape, remember, these college players played more than just 1 year in 2025. I have to tell myself that at times and make sure I go back and watch their tape from maybe their junior season, their sophomore year. It's a entire body of work you got to evaluate. And with Jacoby Lane in 2024, he actually was seen as, I think, the better draft prospect. I think he got more hype in 2024 compared to his teammate, Mekhi Lemon. Again, it depends on what kind of player you're looking for, but if you're looking for a high upside, big body receiver, that definitely needs some work, but you like the value of him over Denzel Boston, and that's the kind of style of receiver you're looking for. Jacoby Lane should be somebody on your radar. Again, not for the second round, not, again, ahead of any of those players that I mentioned in segment one. I like Ted Hurst better. I like Chris Brazzell better. I like him better than Malachi Fields, who I do think is more of that J.J. Arcega-Whiteside type, where I'm a little bit nervous he can only win in one way and not sure how that's going to translate at the NFL level. I have him ahead of Malachi Fields, but I do not have him ahead of Brazzell, Hurst, Bell, or Boston. I think he is a third-round pick. That 68th overall selection, maybe it's 98, depending on how the board falls. I think Lane's an intriguing prospect there. This guy is definitely not underrated. He's going to be a first-round pick, but I think at least when we're talking about the Eagles' options for offensive tackles on day one, I feel like we're not talking about Utah's Caleb Lomu enough. I feel like we talk a lot about Monroe Freeling. I think we talk a lot about Caden Proctor and Blake Miller, Maxi Inekor from Arizona State. Even Spencer Fano from Utah, his teammate, gets talked about more because people are trying to figure out, is he a tackle at the next level? Is he a guard? Is he a center? But Caleb Lomu, I think quietly, is just a really strong prospect to be a long-term starting tackle. When you think about it, there's really not one major thing that should hold him back from being a top 20 pick. He's 6'6", really good arm length. He tested really well at the combine. He's a good athlete. He did not allow a single sack in pass protection in 2025. I feel like he is a clear and concise top 5 tackle, and most boards reflect that. But I don't know, maybe because he's just so solid, people aren't worried about him. And guys like Caden Proctor are more polarizing. Same with Maxi Inekor and Spencer Fano. But Lomu, I don't know. Like, I think he could be an option at 23 that we don't talk about a lot. I think his play strength definitely needs some work and run blocking, but he has a lot of upside, and he can also be somebody that I think can play guard early on. If you don't want to, the reason I haven't wanted to take an offensive tackle over the last couple of years is I felt like Lane Johnson still had, 3 to 4 years left in him. But let's say he still has maybe 2 years left in him, and you don't want your rookie first round pick to be kind of wasted away on the bench for a couple of years of a very valuable 4 to 5 year rookie contract. I think Lomu, unlike a couple of other prospects at tackle in this range of, like, I'd say 15 to 25 in the first round, I think Lomu can actually play guard as well. I think you could kick him inside. And if you want him to start over Tyler Steen, or maybe next year when Tyler Steen walks in free agency, kind of like Cam Jurgens in 2023, you could have, maybe there's one redshirt year where he really focuses on learning from Lane Johnson at tackle. But then in year 2, like Cam Jurgens, he kicks inside to guard, plays next to the guy that he's going to eventually replace at tackle. And then in year 3, he plays tackle. Caleb Lomu is somebody that I could see going in the top 10, going in the top 15, but I don't feel like there's a clear and obvious number 1 tackle. So I could totally see Blake Miller being that guy. I could totally see Monroe Freeling being that guy. I think Francis Mauigoa is probably the favorite to be the first tackle off the board. I could see that, but would you be surprised if a team talked themselves into the power and length and strength of a Caden Proctor? Like, I wouldn't be. So I don't think that Lomu will be available at 23, but I think there is a chance. And so I think he's somebody that you should do some homework on. couple other players here I want to talk about. How about at edge rusher, Zion Young from Missouri? Zion Young is somebody that I feel like I haven't really talked about a lot on the show, but I think he's got a chance to be an end of the first round, early second round kind of pick. And he is a similar player to a Josh Sweat, a Keldrick Falk from Auburn, a bigger body Jalen Phillips, the kind of edge rusher that I've been looking for. I've really targeted Keldrick Falk a lot for that conversation, or Gabe Akis or Malachi Lawrence. But Zion Young, like if you're looking for a hand in the dirt, 6'5" kind of monster against the run to complement what you have in Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt and Arnold Ebiketie, Zion Young could be your guy. He's got a little bit of crazy in him for sure. At his press conference at the Combine, like he's a wild personality on the field. He has an intensity that I think people will really like, and I think it kind of reflects, or it kind of reminds you of Jalen Carter's on-field style. The one thing about, and he went from 2.5 sacks in 2024 to 6.5 in 2025. He's shown progress over the years as a pass rusher. The one issue with Zion Young might be off the field. The DUI is something that you got to be comfortable with. You got to have, whether it's Big Dom or, whoever's in the front office that's in charge of that kind of stuff. And it is Big Dom for the most part, but you got to be comfortable with the off the field stuff as well. But if all of that checks out and you believe in the character, you believe in the kid, I think Zion Young fits the style of player that at least I'm looking for at edge rusher. I'm not sure if Vic Fangio feels the same way, but I think Zion Young's a player that, like at 54, if he's available, or maybe in a trade up, I would be interested. Again, if the off the field stuff checks out, which it's always hard to project and evaluate players with the off the field concerns when you're not inside a building, when you're not inside a war room. But if we're talking about just the on the field kind of player, I think Zion Young fits what I'm looking for at edge rusher. And I think he could be maybe better value when he's available compared to Keldrick Falk out of Auburn, or even, TJ Parker. I like Zion Young a lot better than TJ Parker from Clemson. One more guy here to highlight. How about tight end from Baylor, Michael Trigg? I feel like we haven't talked about Michael Trigg a lot, but this is a former basketball player that has that kind of size and that kind of wingspan. 6'4", 240 pounds. Again, a former basketball star. If you are looking for an above-the-rim kind of red zone threat to eventually replace Dallas Goedert, if you're looking more for a receiving type of tight end, and I think the Eagles are looking for a pretty complete prospect. That's why I always highlight Oscar Delp from Georgia. But if you're looking for somebody that can be a threat in the passing game, if you're looking for a size addition, maybe not a wide receiver, let's say maybe you go with Casey Concepcion in the first round, and your wide receivers are more about speed and route running with DeVonta Smith, and maybe it's like a Omar Cooper or a Concepcion who's like 5'11", 6 foot, Hollywood Brown, but you still want those bigger bodies on the field. Maybe that comes in the form of a tight end like Michael Trigg from Baylor. Again, 6'4", really long arms, good hands catcher, is a pretty fluid athlete for a guy that size. I think he's pretty raw as a route runner and as a blocker. Definitely more of a third-round pick, but if the Eagles go with a tight end closer to the end of day 2, early day 3, instead of like first or second round, I think Michael Trigg could be really good value. So those are some guys to watch that we haven't really talked about at positions of need. Jacoby Lane from USC at receiver, Caleb Lomu, the tackle from Utah, Missouri edge rusher Zion Young, and then Baylor tight end Michael Trigg. All right, guys, we saved the best for last. Coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles, we got to talk about this Dianna Russini-Mike Vrabel drama. All right, wrapping up this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Look, this is not ET. This is not TMZ. I don't want to get into the relationship part of this. Don't want to speculate about that kind of stuff. But there were pictures that came out yesterday from the New York Post that showed Dianna Russini and Mike Vrabel together at I don't know if it was a hotel or resort before the owners' meetings, whatever. Regardless, it shows a relationship, whether it's friendly, whether it's professional, who knows? Again, don't want to get into that part. It shows a close relationship between Mike Vrabel and the NFL insider that has been pushing the A.J. Brown trade, I don't want to say rumors, but reports more than anybody. And the problem that I have with this, especially as a journalist, especially as somebody that has a journalism degree, the problem is not about I think a lot of Eagles fans are taking victory laps today as if Dianna Russini's been making this up all along, all the trade drama, all the trade rumors, to try to create a story, to try to actually create a trade for her buddy Mike Vrabel and the New England Patriots. I think you're naive and still in denial about AJ potentially getting traded if that is the victory lap you're taking. It is very clear and obvious that AJ Brown could get traded. It is very obvious that teams have been talking with the Philadelphia Eagles. Literally this morning, Adam Schefter on 97.5 The Fanatic said that AJ Brown was nearly traded to the Los Angeles Rams. Like, a trade was very close to happening last month. The Patriots GM, the Rams GM, they have all confirmed they've talked with the Eagles. Dianna Russini, actually, these pictures show, I think, the validity of a potential trade even more, because her source was literally the New England Patriots head coach. So obviously, Mike Vrabel knows if the Eagles have been talking with the Patriots about AJ Brown. So if that's the angle you're taking with this, and if that is the victory lap you're taking, I think you're being a little bit naive and being in denial. Where it ticks me off is that I think there's a huge conflict of interest here with a journalist that is supposed to be non-biased. And it almost feels like, because of the amount of reports that she sent out, because of the dead horse that she beat with this AJ Brown trade story for months and months, it just would not let it go. And it felt like there weren't really any new reports or new details for this story being added. And yet reports just kept coming out from her. I'm frustrated because it feels motivated. It feels like what Mike Vrabel and the Patriots were almost trying to use Dianna Russini to create leverage with the Eagles, to lower the asking price, to try to almost will this thing into existence to get AJ Brown to New England. The fact that she posted so many reports about this story, the fact that it always felt like it was about the New England Patriots. And now we know that she's pretty close. I don't know to what level, but pretty close with Mike Vrabel. That's where I get ticked off. And that's where now it's hard to not have trust issues with insiders when they frame things as reports, when maybe this could be what's going on behind the scenes, that teams could be manipulating. And I believe this happens all the time, and I think agents of players do this too with Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport, but teams could be manipulating reporters, and you scratch my back, I scratch yours. The reporter gets all this inside information and their career advances. But at the same time, the team benefits, because if Dianna Russini continues to churn out all of these reports that AJ Brown's miserable, inside Philadelphia, the Eagles and AJ are at odds, and a trade's going to happen at some point, and AJ really wants to be a Patriot, the Patriots really want AJ, like, that affects a trade. Like, they are trying to impact negotiations. Like, if all of that comes out, that the Eagles and AJ just hate each other, the Patriots can then go to the Philadelphia Eagles and say, well, clearly you guys are trying to get rid of them, and that could affect the asking price. It could affect the Eagles' leverage. Has it? Clearly not. Howie Roseman's a G. He is a big capital G for GM. He is somebody that is not going to get bullied in trade negotiations. He's somebody that's standing firm on his AJ Brown asking price. Clearly he wants at least a first-round pick, and I'd imagine upwards of a second rounder or a third. I don't think he's going to accept anything less than the Jalen Waddle trade value, which was a first and a third from the Denver Broncos to the Miami Dolphins. So it clearly has not worked, but the motivation now behind a lot of this story, a lot of those reports, it feels motivated towards the New England Patriots. And that's the problem I have. Not that AJ could get traded to the Patriots, by the way, who he clearly wants to go to. He's been flirting with New England all offseason too. My problem is with the motivation now of some of these insiders, and that bothers me. It feels like they were directly trying to manipulate this trade market in favor of one specific team, and that's what bothers me. Now, I'm petty. If I was Howie Roseman, I would not under any circumstances trade him to the New England Patriots. I'm sorry. Like, I would just not do it. Between all of this with Russini and Vrabel being buddy-buddy and trying to make this thing happen, and with AJ Brown so clearly wanting to be in New England this offseason and just fanboying over the Patriots this year, no thanks. F out of here. Like, I do not want AJ Brown in New England. I just don't. So I don't know what's going to happen. Look, if they get a first and second round pick, fine, whatever. If they get Kayshon Boutte thrown in as well. But this is a crazy story, and it adds just a whole new wrinkle to what has been one of the most complicated, dramatic trade stories that we've had in a very long time. Like, I didn't really get to experience coherently the Donovan McNabb, Terrell Owens story from 2004 to 2005, but this feels similar. And with the Jalen Hurts drama also being added to it, and that definitely is part of the AJ Brown story for sure of why he's not happy. This is one of the craziest stories that I've covered in a long time. And to add this now to the equation, where the insider, the Eagles fan base was after more than anybody, the one that just would not let this go, Dianna Russini, was now caught with the Patriots head coach hanging out together. Like, just, you can't make it up. It's kind of hilarious. It really is unbelievable. All right, guys, we're going to go until our bonus show later on today. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.